Rox saying that Emu is the world itself makes Rox and Loki's dream to destroy the world seem more along the lines to destroy Emu/the world government. So that is such a fantastic point, because what Rox says about Emu in this chapter completely changes the context of what Loki said way back in chapter 1130. And as a reminder, that was, "I am the sun god who brings the world to an end," which is the cool main line that's led to the idea of Loki being a villain. That and all of the slander that's been spread about him by all of the other giants. But we've mainly dismissed all of that at this point. And really, the only thing that was keeping Loki in this potential villain territory was his alleged desire to destroy the world. Alleged by him, I should say. But right now, that is looking more like taking a stand against Emu than it is any kind of physical destruction. And of course, the other major thing that this possibility recontextualizes is the Harley text, which, as read to us, is divided into 3 sections. The first world, the second world, and the third world. And up until now, we, or at the very least, I have been thinking about these as more or less literal world planets, that the One Piece world has seen at least 3 different incarnations marked by apocalyptic natural disasters, and that could still be the case. But what's happening now, right, is I'm starting to look at these 3 silhouettes on the Elbaf mural, and I'm starting to think, was each one of these 3 creatures at one point considered to be quote unquote the world? Like, let's say that Emu is this devil-like being on the far left fighting against Nika, Joy Boy, Luffy, or whoever that may represent, possibly all 3. But let's say that this Emu here is the latest incarnation of the world, and possibly even the god of the sea who's mentioned to storm at the end of the second world. With that in mind, I reckon that this snake-like thing could be the earth god that is mentioned in the first world that was covered in fire, whilst this dragon sort of thing is the forest god who fought the earth god, which we can see in the mural. There is some fierce fight battling happening there. But after winning, the forest god took domain as the second world, which was, as we just said, eventually drowned and taken over by Emu the sea god, which leaves us with one final god that the Harley text mentions, the sun god. And that also leaves us with the idea that the fourth world is going to be made in Nika's image with the promise of the dawn of the world. And that would also explain why Loki is claiming to be the sun god. If he is aware of Emu and Rox's classification of him as, quote, the world, then Loki knows that, according to the Harley text and the fun pictures, that it is only the sun god who is going to be able to overcome Emu. And to continue to bring everything full circle, this is also likely why Rox needed King Harold, because Rox also knew that only the sun god can beat the world at this stage in the cycle, and so he needed Harold to unlock the abilities of the sun god to do so. I think we're gonna see Emu's actual face in this flashback. Alright, so the longer this goes on, the more I'm thinking that we've actually seen Emu's face right from the beginning. At this point, I'm not really expecting a moment where the light hits Emu in just the right way, and the shadows vanish and we see who we're truly dealing with here. This might just be because all of the things it is that I just said, but this form of Emu could just be the sea god, which makes sense because I believe that Emu is based on an Umibozu. However, Emu may also have a base form, like how Luffy can take on the appearance of the sun god Nika. Saint Emu Nerona may have been the human that inherited the abilities of the sea god, but if we do see his original face, I think that would be saved for a Void Century flashback, so I'm not so sure about now. Am I the only one who noticed that Kuma saved a mother with 2 little girls that looked exactly like the drawing of Teacher's mom that Oda drew in the SBS, and he said he had 2 sisters? So what this comment is referring to is this panel of chapter 1162 featuring a mother and 2 children. I don't know if they're both girls. One looks like it could be a boy. And I also don't know if I would personally use the word exactly, but they are kind of similar to Oda's original plans for Blackbeard's family. Initially, Blackbeard was going to have a mother and 2 sisters, which Ace would have discovered when he caught up to Blackbeard on Bonaro Island. And this mother sketch is a character that I affectionately refer to as Marsha D. Teach, and now that we know that her design was scrapped in favor of Eris, it wouldn't surprise me if Oda put the family into this chapter as a reference to this original idea. Again, I don't think they look amazingly similar, but it could be a nod to those release sketches. The fact that Whitebeard is ride or die with Rox makes Teach's betrayal all the more tragic. Not only that, but also the fact that after this, Whitebeard went on to adopt Teach, even if he didn't know that Teach was Rox's Rox' son. So unless Whitebeard gets Dommy reversied and kills Rox with his bare hands, Whitebeard ended up with a very unfair shake of the sauce bottle from Blackbeard here. The kind of shake where you realize that, mate, there's no sauce left because some prick dumped it all on his buffet of cherry pies. Internet man, you shouldn't underestimate the Banana Knight. In a few weeks from now, you are going to hype him up when he gives Whitebeard a chest tattoo with his sword. So this is a very fair point, even though at the moment Garling has shown no aptitude in fighting against anyone who isn't either a slave, a woman in love, or an otherwise not in any way combat-trained individual like, say, Saint Mosgard. The Holy Knights have a habit of thinking that they are ever so powersome, but this is a mental illusion that they've created by mostly using their abilities on those who cannot actually fight back. With that said, in regards to Garling, God Valley is where I was expecting Whitebeard's line from all the way back in chapter 434 to pay off. The one where he comes face to face with Shanks and he says, "When I look at your face, it makes my scars ache. The scars I got from him." And if it wasn't Figurland Garling who is the him who gave him those scars, or scar singular, it's a bit hard to tell. The official Wentworth scars plural, but that's not necessarily correct. But I digress, because if not Garling, then who? Who else has the face of a Shanks? It would have to be Shamrock, and that doesn't feel like a particularly likely encounter to me. So as much as I have, and honestly will continue to clown on Garling because he deserves it as a result of this chapter, I do think that he is going to be the guy who might take Whitebeard out of this fight. And in doing so, Garling could inflict a lifelong mental wound as well, should it lead directly to Rox's demise, which may have been prevented if Whitebeard would have been able to act. The fact that Zebek's best feats of destroying a gate of justice, killing an admiral, and beating Garling are all off-screen proves that Blackbeard got it from his dad. That is exactly right. At one point during Marineford, one Drakeul Mihawk stated that Luffy had the most dangerous power in the world by being able to make allies out of everyone that he meets. However, at the moment, even that power pales in comparison to the off-screen abilities of the Davy clan, which means that the most dangerous moment of each and every One Piece episode is when that to be continued screen hits, because that is when the Davy clan get to act. Wow. So Emu can possess anyone with the Abyss Mark / demon powers. Elbaf led me to believe that Gunko was Emu's designated vessel. This power is completely and utterly overwhelming, so I don't know if Emu can possess anyone with the mark, although if true it would be yet another reason why Shanks happily had his mark of the Abyss gobbled up by a hungry lord of the coast. But at the moment, between Saturn and Gunko, the only factor of consistency we have is their eternal youth. The rest of the Holy Knights, they still age naturally, but Gunko and the Five Elders do not. So the eternal youth factor may be linked to the restrictions of who Emu can and cannot possess. And in that case, maybe Gunko is actually in training or in waiting as a potential candidate to become a future Elder Star if another spot were to open up. Meanwhile, a question I do now have is why Emu didn't choose to possess any of the Elders and make an appearance during Egghead Island, as his abilities may very well have been able to prevent the escape of the Straw Hats by Dommy reversing the Giant Warrior Pirates, much like he's doing on Elbaf right now. Kaido devouring the devil fruit in Linlin's hands is the most little brother energy I've seen in this series. So Kaido is certainly being a brat on the world stage in this chapter, but it does have me thinking about Linlin's line in chapter 999 where she said, "On the day rocks fell into ruin at God Valley, I gave you that legendary model of the fish fruit. You owe me for life, Kaido." And I've seen a few people say that this is inconsistent writing and that now Oda has retconned how Kaido obtained the fruit, but I actually think it is perfectly consistent with how Big Mom thinks. Remember that this is the woman who accidentally ate all of her friends as well as Mother Carmel, and has somehow deluded herself into thinking that they all just abandoned her one day. Plus, the other factor that some people may or may not be considering is that Big Mom still considers Kaido to be family. In chapter 999, Linlin says that she still thinks of Kaido as a little brother, and with that in mind, I think that Linlin has substituted reality for her own vision of the perfect family that she's trying to achieve. And so POV, right? You are Charlotte Linlin, and you know that your little brother would surely never betray you, because that would not be a perfect family. family, and so that must mean that the only option is that you gave him the fruit. Yes, yes. I'm not trying to poke holes in the story, but I love how characters just automatically know how to use their fruit powers, even if they don't know what they're eating. Kaido was so happy being a dragon, and that makes me happy too. That's nice. I'm glad it makes you happy. But when it comes to fictional fruit powers, Kaido does have a pretty big advantage because he knew what the fruit would be in advance. Ginny broadcasted the fruit so they all would have known what was up for grabs. And Kaido's other advantage is just being a pretty proficient dude in general. He spent his entire life in battle mode, and so he probably has a better sense of how to use a new form. Although just like Kaku and Califa on any Slobby, I doubt that Kaido's going to be anywhere near a perfect fruit user by next chapter. I would be surprised if we saw his hybrid form, for example, and it would be fun to show him making a few mistakes as well. And it might even be his unfamiliarity with this new form that takes him out of the fight. Anyone else notice that Eris is the only one so far that calls him Zebek? Everyone else calls him Rox. It's a bit romantic that only his wife calls him Zebek, probably because Rox is not his actual name, it is Davy. And just to add to that, even if Rox did go by the name Davy D. Zebek, Eris still wouldn't call him Davy because that would be his surname. So of course his wife is going to use his given name, but I do also take the point that seemingly everyone else in this world refers to him just as Rox. Whereas you don't really see anyone calling Luffy Monkey. But I think that's for two reasons. One is out of respect for Rox himself because that's how he introduces himself. For example, when he met King Harold at the Reverie, Rox introduced himself as Rox. And most people probably don't even know that he has a full name, much less a secret full name on top of and or below that, depending on where it is you keep your secrets. Although what I'm really waiting for is the revelation of why this man, Davy D. Zebek, chose the name Rox. Even if Oda originally just used it because it sounded cool, in world, I imagine that it has something to do with Rox's ambition, and perhaps he specifically chose a name connected to land as a way of taking a stand against the sea god, some crap like that. Huge assumption that Garp has chosen to fight the world government from within. In reality, he's neutralized by being stuck as a vice admiral, refusing to be an admiral and the world noble's lapdog. He proceeds to just be the quote hero of the Marines as he does nothing for the next 38 years. Alright, I'm a bit surprised that people can read One Piece this far into the series and still think that Garp is going to end up being portrayed like this, because there is a big difference between 38 years of inaction and 38 years of action that we haven't been shown yet. And the reason why I'm pretty confident in making that assumption is because of the kind of author that Eiichiro Oda has been throughout the past almost 30 years. If this was Hunter x Hunter we were talking about, then sure, I would be 100% on board with Garp being an exploration of the consequences of inaction, because that is the sort of thing that Yoshihiro Togashi would insert, because he has a fascination with humanity as it is. And if you'd like to explore that a bit more, I have a whole channel dedicated to Hunter x Hunter called New World Review, link in the description. However, Oda is an author who thinks more about portraying humanity in a positive and almost unattainable way, to be the best we possibly could be. And given that Garp to date has been shown as a man with the right kind of morals, I know that Oda is going to redeem his perception and explain his actions later down the line. I love the bombastic side-eye that Kinemon gives to Ulti in the cover page. Kinemon's expression is fantastic because he's all like, hey, wait a minute, weren't you subjugating my people a couple of weeks ago? But I also love Ulti's eyes looking straight back up at him. She is giving Kinemon the cutest and most innocent puppy dog eyes as if nothing had ever happened. And you know what? I choose to invest in those eyes because you will find no greater loyalty than that of a puppy dog. The cover story finishing and finally finding peace makes me feel like Blackbeard is going to destroy it and take the ancient weapon. So the comment here referring to Wano is the it, and for good reason, because in chapter 1079, it is revealed that the reason why Shanks was sailing near Wano was because he believed that Blackbeard was going to show up. Shanks doesn't say exactly why it is he believed this, but we can make the pretty educated guess that with the defeat of Big Mom and Kaido, and with only a weakened Straw Hat crew remaining, it would have left a gaping opening to assault Wano, either to claim Kaido's road poneglyph, the ancient weapon Pluton, or or both, which Shanks was right to think, because this is the exact strategy that Blackbeard used during Marineford. He let two factions fight it out and then swept in for some profitable cleanup. However, Mr. Blackbeard did not in fact show up, and this is likely for a couple of reasons. The first is that I don't think he was quite ready to conduct an invasion of the scale that Wano would require. At the moment, Lafitte is at the shipyards owned by Umit, and the theory here is that Lafitte is securing vessels to transport the army of pirates on Hachinosu, so that is problem number one. If that hasn't been secured yet, then Blackbeard just was not ready to move, and so he was only capable of taking smaller actions like sending Kuzan and Van Alga to Whole Cake Island in order to abduct Charlotte Pudding. But the second reason why Blackbeard would not have attacked Wano is because he doesn't necessarily know that Wano is the location of Pluton. At least not at the time. He certainly does know now after Caribou has been brought to Hachinosu, who would have informed him not only about Pluton but also Poseidon on Fishman Island, because this little swamp rat knows far too much. And this is why the newfound piece on Wano as illustrated in the Yamato cover story may not last very long, because it is likely that Blackbeard is either going to attack Wano or Fishman Island. Although I do think that Fishman Island is probably the more likely target due to Umit's specialty in transportation through the deep sea currents. And if Blackbeard had his eyes on Wano, then he probably wouldn't need to send Lafitte to the underwater guy. But just to go back to the cover story, now that it's all over, we are probably going to be spending a while doing viewer art requests. That's just how the pattern tends to go. A cover story, then a batch of art requests, and a cover story, etc. But to put in an early bid for the next cover story, I'm thinking that we'll either be following the surviving Vegapunks floating around on Punk Records, which I think would be really fun because we might get to see all sorts of crazy sky stuff, maybe even stop by on Witheria, or potentially go higher and explore space a bit more. However, the next cover story could also be focused on Sentamaru, who escaped Egghead Island all by himself in a fun little boat, and I'd be pretty happy with either one of them, but this is more than likely a 2026 thing, and we'll be spending at least the rest of the year in art request territory. Man on a channel, how much of these events do you think Luffy is learning? I can't imagine him knowing all about Shanks' origins and Blackbeard's past just like this. So right now Luffy is assumedly paying attention to Loki's story as best a Luffy can. However, what we have to discern is how much of this is Loki actually saying. As much as I love the idea that Loki's gone into this full-on wild ramble about Shaki and One Piece idol culture, when what we actually sat down to do here is explain why and how King Harold died, and we're now at the point where some people have forgotten that King Harold was even part of this flashback to begin with. But look, let's be extra generous and say that Loki is reporting everything as we see and hear it. Even if that is the case, I don't think that Luffy's going to be taking a lot of it in. And it'll be sort of like when Frankie tried to explain that Den was his master's brother coding the Thousand Sunny, and Luffy passed that information as a master coding Frankie's little brother. Because there comes a point at which, no matter how important the information, Luffy just cannot take any more in. And he, just like we discussed with Big Mom, decides to substitute in his own reality, which is a concept that we'd best get used to. Because according to this, the world theory, following the dawn and the remaking of the planet and the liberating beams of the sun god, Luffy's reality is going to be everyone's reality.